You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. So welcome one, welcome all. If this is the first time that you're tuning in for the show, where have you been all this time? Don't you know that this is the place to be? And if you're a returning member of our audience, as always, welcome once again. And we're always excited to have you here with us to listen to some amazing stories here on Changing Reality. So if this is your first time and you're wondering what is this show all about, Changing Reality is essentially a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are, in essence, changing their own reality. And through this show, we have the opportunity to hang out and interview brilliant industry leaders, change makers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, to even business owners, artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world, and many of whom have spent some time here on the Penn campus as well. And the idea is that by hearing their stories, we'd hopefully get a little bit of, insight or some nuggets of wisdom that we can use to apply in our own journeys to shorten our own learning curves, figure out what it is that we're good at, what we're passionate about, and hopefully achieve the goals that we want for ourselves as well. And I wanted to do this show simply because I felt like there are a lot of people out there who do phenomenal things and make waves in the lives of those around them. And I'm very, very passionate about hearing how they got started on their journeys. What were their superhero origin stories, in a sense, and how that shaped the work that they do today and the lives that they live today in a way. And I believe that, the power of stories is something that is universal. It's something that has the ability to change the world. And it's something that's been fundamental in my own journey as well. So a little bit about me. Hi, I'm your host, Harsha, and I'll be walking you through this show today. Personally, I actually founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance that started back at home in Malaysia, which is where I'm from. But today has gone on to collaborate not just with our own Malaysian Ministry of Education, but works with 26 over countries to provide an alternate education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, and projects that help them discover what it is that they love doing, learn about themselves and the world around them, and start their own careers while they're still in school. That creates meaningful impact, not just for themselves, but for those around them as well. And we've been very, very fortunate over the last few years to work with over 50,000 students, 970 communities, and have incubated countless number of student-run projects, as well as social enterprises run by students as young as 8 to 25 years old, helping everyday students change their reality. And the foundation of all of that, the reason we've been able to do so much, has been because of stories. It's been because of kind individuals who've been willing to take time out of their busy schedules to share with us what worked for them, what were the lessons that they learned along the way, and how we can replicate that in our own lives. So just like that, I hope that this show is that same platform for you, so that each and every single one of you listening who have the opportunity to be a part of these conversations, to listen to the things that will drive you, will inspire you. And if there are any specific topics, experiences, industries that you want to talk about, feel free to reach out on email, in our show chat, on our social medias as well, so that we can find how we can incorporate the stories that matter the most to you onto our show as well. So moving on to today's speaker. Today we have an absolutely brilliant speaker with an amazing story to share with us. He serves currently as the Chief Market Strategist and Head of Franklin Templeton Institute. And today he actually works on leveraging the knowledge of the firm's autonomous investment teams to provide global capital market and long-term investment insights internally and to clients as well. He has a long list of brilliant experiences in the field that today he actually uses as a member of Franklin's Resource Executive Committee as well, a small group of the company's top leaders responsible for shaping the firm's overall strategy. Prior to his current role, he served as the Executive Vice President, Head of Equities for Franklin Templeton, leading the firm's equity investments. He also served as the Chief Investment Officer of the firm's Emerging Markets Equity Group and local asset management teams. So even prior to that, he was the founder and chief investment officer at Bradesco Templeton Asset Management, a joint venture between Franklin Templeton and Banco Bradesco in São Paulo, in Brazil. So he has had so many experiences prior to that as well in the investment world, and has had a brilliant career which spanned and brought him across the world. He has lived all over, from China, Europe, Brazil, the United States, and many more. And he also spent some time here on the Penn campus as well, having did his MBA at the Wharton School here at the University of Pennsylvania. So without further ado, let me bring on our phenomenal guest speaker onto our virtual stage. Welcoming him to our virtual studio. Hi,
Well,
Steven.
thank you. It's great to be here. That's the most enthusiastic introduction I think I've ever had. So thank you.
Well, you're pretty famous. You're on the news every other day, so I'm assuming that compliment was a lie. But thank you anyway. It made me feel good. So great start. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to have you on the show. But before we get started, please tell me a little bit about how your week's going, how you've been for the last couple of days before we jump right in.
Well, it's been a great week. Both I'm out here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're getting a little rain and snow, so that's been an experience. I'm an outdoor swimmer, so it's cold and a little bit hard for us to swim outside right now. Markets are difficult to look at. They always are. So there's lots of questions and insecurities. So trying to work with individuals and companies and pensions and nonprofits to try to guide them in the best way to invest is a challenge right now. So that's my job. That's what we as a firm are trying to do.
Well, we thank you for your service. I know a lot of people in the investment world right now are having sleepless nights, so we appreciate every single one of you. And thank you
Right.
for all of the thought that you put into that. Hopefully this will give you a
Well,
little break.
The whole intention is to not have sleepless nights, right? You want to be able to not disturb your sleep, worrying about your investments or worrying about your future. That's really the idea.
I feel many people like outside of the world of Penn and like Wharton don't really know about the investment world as much, or don't follow the lifestyle as much. I mean, there are those in the field, but personally for me, I had no idea how much energy, how much time, how much effort people put when they're in this role, in a sense, up until I actually got to Penn. And I think now I'm very much in awe and slightly terrified for the health of many of my friends in the investment world. But I'm so curious, how did you find out about this? Or why did you want to pursue a career in this industry in the first place?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story, but perhaps interesting. I was raised on a ranch in Montana, so didn't have some of the benefits of an urban life or even an urban education. And there were some, of course, my father being a rancher and my mother being a school teacher, they didn't have a lot of money, but they were kind of interested in retirement and investing in opportunities. And there was an expert who came to town, which also could be called a Californian, which is how Montanans think of Californians, and really convinced many people in the community to make investments in an opportunity that looked very good to all of them. And the short story is that was a scam. And so he took a lot of money from the community, from a lot of farmers and teachers and just ordinary individuals. And to this day, I am furious about that. And so I wanted to be in a situation in which I could help average people, teachers, farmers, nonprofit people, whoever, to be able to sleep at night, to where you started, and to be able to make reasonable decisions about their investment horizons and be able to retire and be able to put their kids through school, and mostly not get ripped off. And so that's really been a passion and a drive for me. So maybe a little different than people who want to work on Wall Street or something like that. I don't care about Wall Street. I care about people on Main Street and trying to help them retire and meet their financial goals.
Oh, that's amazing, and it's something that I think is very salient with many things that a lot of our audience probably have like experienced personally. Like I think recently there's been no shortage of scams or no shortage of like different opportunities, and sometimes I feel like we forget, we hear about the ones that affect us the most, but we forget the most vulnerable groups don't even have the avenue to talk about what actually happened, and where things went wrong in a way. So really, really noble pursuits in a sense.
Yeah, I would just note on that throughout my career and life and currently, fraud is common. And there are a lot of ways that people take other people's money. It's very common. Right now, I'm dealing with a father who's 90 years old. He's been susceptible to fraud, unfortunately, and a lot of old people are. So there's really a lot of bad actors out there who take advantage of people, um, and uh, and their lack of knowledge about investments.
Tell me about, as someone who's been in kind of that space when you were first starting out in life. Tell me about the emotional state that that creates, and how did that drive you into figuring out where to go next, and what was the next step for you in your career, in your personal life.
Well, I think it. I was in a situation where I didn't have any role models or any real idea of kind of what it meant to, to not be kind of a blue collar type of person, because in those small towns, that's all there was. Probably the most prestigious position in the town was called president of the bank, which I didn't realize until much later in my life was actually a branch manager. But anyway, that was that was a very
So
prestigious position that I would have aspired to. So I didn't have I didn't have a sense of what schools were outside of Montana. I also happened to be raised in a very religious upbringing, so my family would have preferred that I go to a more religious school. So I never heard of University of Pennsylvania, or obviously I'd heard of Harvard or Princeton or something like that. So my first step was really to have an opportunity to have an education outside of Montana. I got a liberal arts education at a very small liberal arts school because that school wrote to me and offered me a scholarship because I had been a debater at that time, but kind of random. But going to school, going to college, meeting people from all over the place was really quite a shock to me. I'd never maybe it's funny, but I'd never heard of private schools. I always thought there was there's the local school and there's the Catholic schools. So all these kids who'd gone to private school and prep schools and were way educated beyond me, was somewhat of a surprise to me. So I really kind of entered my educational world fairly sheltered and naive, which made college for me phenomenal, because I was drinking from the proverbial fire hose, but it was amazing. I studied everything. Um, I really was just a student for love, for trying to learn as much as possible, and also trying to figure out what this kind of investment world meant, because I was pretty clear it didn't mean what I understood to be investment banking, and it didn't mean um, the most prevalent jobs at that time, which were brokers who sold things to people. I don't have the personality to dial people up and try to sell something, but I also don't think that's probably the right way to achieve the goal of helping people retire. So the other very big event in my life in college was, even though I went to a small school, they were the first to put people into southern China. So I was one of the first Americans to study in southern China back in 1981, and lived there, and probably one of the few people who studied Marxist economics, or Maoist economics, actually. So so that kind of made the second big pillar of what I decided to do in life. I wanted to be involved in what in that time were called third world countries, and now called emerging market countries. But I know yourself is from Malaysia, so Malaysia would have been a much bigger part of the free economy at that point. And those were the countries that I was most interested in. So then I was trying to combine these two things, working in investment and working in working globally. So I did go to the Wharton School, and at that time, in the late 80s, Wharton was well known for finance, but not well known for investment, and only had a couple courses in investment, and actually very few of the students left and worked in investment management. Everybody seemed to go to consulting or investment banking. So I had a struggle to kind of try to find out um, where I could go to do what I wanted to do. So I ended up working for Franklin Templeton, which was a medium-sized asset management company at that time. Now it's one of the largest in the world, but that's what it was at that time. So that, that in short is kind of how I got started, and have had opportunities to work all over the world, but also to manage people all over the world, to invest all over the world, to start asset management companies all over the world. So in my goal of trying to kind of help middle class people, if you will, be able to invest, I think I've been able to do that in America. But we started asset management companies, or I worked to start asset management companies in India and China, Malaysia, actually. And so helping people in those areas that didn't quite have some of the advantages that people had in the United States.
Well, on behalf of the region, I'll extend the thank you for everyone here in a sense. I think the world of finance and investing and everything is still maturing in this part of the world. So we need a lot of expertise, and everything probably helped much more than you could possibly imagine. You have this goal of wanting to help people, figuring out the focus of the area you want to help people in. But you also have this career path that like many people often say, you don't often get to choose your first roles. You got to just take what's coming and then move towards where you want to go. How did you kind of reconcile the both of starting off in a career and finding a way to kind of slowly start working towards and heading towards a role that would kind of allow you to achieve that goal that you have of helping people in emerging markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I tell the listeners is there are so many different things to do out there that you're not aware of, that you mostly need to focus on skill sets that are going to let you do all sorts of things. And the good thing about the American economy particularly, but I think even more in the future, is you're going to be able to create opportunities that work for you, that are more around what you want to do. And that's wonderful. But gosh, in your 20s, it's just terrible. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, it's great. You're young, you're healthy, you're beautiful, that's all great. But
you're having a terrible time. So yeah.
But in terms of that soul searching, who am I and what do I want to do? And am I on my career path? So yeah, there's a certain amount of people that are on a career path and they just kind of bounce up it. I actually didn't do that. So I kind of shortened my story before. So when I graduated from undergraduate, I ended up working as a financial planner. And I was one of the, I mean, there were others, but one of the first that did what's called fee-based financial planning, as opposed to just trying to sell things to individuals. And I enjoyed that. At that point, it was it was much more lucrative to sell investments to people than it was to be a financial planner. And it wasn't as kind of intellectually stimulating as I would have liked. And it wasn't leverage. I was dealing with one person at a time. So I wanted something to change that. And that was really part of the initiative that moved me to Wharton and to Penn, which I'm very thankful for. It has been very helpful in terms of credibility in my career. There have been probably a little bit earlier in my career, but a lot of people that have accepted me, like when I have worked in Asia or something, based on my credential of having a Wharton MBA. I jokingly told a person who told me, he said, Stephen, I really respect you. You've done such a great job and you're a Wharton MBA and that's really impressive. And I said, well, probably you don't know, but I was at the lowest person in my class at a Wharton MBA. I barely passed. he said, "Oh, I didn't know that. That kind of bothers me." I said, "I'm joking. That wasn't true, but why does it matter, right? I've been working for 20 years, and whether I got a Wharton MBA matters to you." So, but that said, it was helpful. But I couldn't find the job I wanted when I graduated. So I worked as a consultant for uh, 3 years or so before I directly went into the investment management business. So what was hard for me was to find that combination of investing and being global. And
Mhm.
there weren't jobs there. That industry hadn't developed, as I said. Um, so I would guess that Franklin Templeton now probably has 150, maybe 200 Wharton MBAs working for it. I mean, I have 24 Wharton MBAs working for me, but um, but at that point, I was the first. It just that wasn't the industry hadn't developed yet. So we kind of had to make it on our own.
So you're kind of the credit to successful for Franklin Templeton. They're medium sized when you started. Now they're like global leaders. It's all
Well,
you.
when I started at Franklin Templeton, we had less than 100 billion. Now we have 1.5 trillion under management. So yeah, this is a company that's had phenomenal growth, absolutely phenomenal growth.
Okay, that is crazy in a sense. And they are, as you said, like globally recognized in a sense. You I think were very instrumental in, as we mentioned earlier, in kind of the emerging markets part of it. I wanted to talk also about a bit of your time when you were in Brazil, I think, where you actually founded and kind of set up a lot of the work that they do down there in a sense. How did you go about that experience in a sense? Like how did you stumble into that opportunity? How did that opportunity meet you?
Well, my wife speaks fluent Spanish, so the company thought it'd be great, and she's worked actually she worked in Franklin as well on the marketing side. And since she spoke perfect Spanish, they thought it'd be great to send her to Brazil, which, if anyone knows anything about Brazil, they don't speak Spanish, they speak Portuguese. But that's kind of the level of knowledge people have. But this is in the late 90s, and the world is just absolutely opening up. And Brazil, which has been a closed country for the previous, well, for the previous 100 years, but certainly for the last 20 or 30 years, was opening up. It had been for a short period a democracy. It was moving through that whole movement where it was privatizing businesses, and Brazil was desperate for kind of knowledge about how to develop their economy. And so this was an opportunity where my company, Franklin Templeton, did a joint venture with one of the bigger banks in Brazil, Bradesco, to do a joint venture to start an asset management company. And so for me, myself, I'd never been to Brazil before. I didn't speak Spanish and certainly not Portuguese. And so it was a big stepping off adventure to take my family. I had two little twin children, and moved to Brazil and try to start a joint asset management company. It was really difficult, but also the best experience in our lives, both personally, professionally, but also just as a family. So how did it start? So we were down there, and Bradesco expected us to be experts because we were Americans, and because I had a Wharton MBA. And the opening was they gave us a conference room with an old-fashioned telephone in the middle, and we brought down personal computers, and they said, "Start an asset management company." So it was hard to kind of figure out how to start. We had to hire people. I'm saying Brazil was modernizing, but it was still a very closed country. So all of our belongings didn't arrive for 6 or 8 months. We worked just crazy hours to try to start this. We were working with with an old world bank in Bradesco. They wanted to be a joint venture because they couldn't do it themselves because they just weren't. They were a very old fashioned bank. And Franklin Templeton was a global company, but didn't really have anything in Brazil. So incredibly steep learning curve. You have to learn a language to be able to talk and hire to people. You're trying to hire people in an economy in which there are no people that have experience. So, so by the way, I started the asset management company in China as well. That was the same problem we had in China and Malaysia for that reason. So you have to, you're hiring people who you think have potential. Um, you're trying to build a culture, and you're talking primarily to pension plans, and you're trying to say to them, look, you've basically invested in just banknotes all the time. Why don't you look at other investments? Why don't you look at equity? Why don't you look at investments outside of Brazil? And Brazil had massive corruption, and I was offered ridiculous bribes, and blatantly like, okay, welcome, gringo, here you are. What kind of bribe do you want? Kind of shocking, really. And so our differentiator, to some degree, was that we were clean, if you will. So one of the reasons that pensions, who had their own corruption problems, would hire us is because they needed to appear clean. So they needed to hire at least one clean manager, if you will. But just to give you, an idea, the 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 commissions that they charged on trades were very high. And then they refunded 80% of the commissions, the brokerage houses did, and they would direct those refunds to anybody. So what typically happened was the manager took half of that, and then they paid the bureaucrat who gave them a contract. So it was just a system set up for massive fraud. So that's how we started. And then because they were new companies, a lot of small companies, and they were trying to figure out how to be in the capital markets, and they actually had been run by a military government before. We were trying to help them with good corporate governance, how to be good companies, how to work well with shareholders, how to treat your employees well, which is called corporate governance. So we started a corporate governance fund, which was massively successful. By Brazil standards, it started out at $1.5 billion. So it was one of the largest. This is an emerging economy, one of the largest funds to start out in Brazil, and had a very big influence. We worked with the World Bank and everything to try to improve and restructure the way that companies deal with shareholders in Brazil. So back to my original goal, I feel kind of proud that I or our company had an impact on improving the system in Brazil. So it was less corrupt, and it was a better system ultimately for pensions and for hopefully middle class investors.
Oh, absolutely amazing. And as someone in an emerging market economy, situations like this have always fascinated me a lot, because one of the things you hear about is change is really tough because the system has been operating in the way that it has been for many years, and then like for one person to make a difference, it can be a bit challenging. But I think this story is very inspiring because it shows that there is an impact that can be made.
Right. So
What?
let's talk about Malaysia for just a second. Your country, okay?
Oh
So
dear.
look, in 2007, 2008, the global financial crisis, and it was terrible in Asia, and it was terrible in Malaysia. And during that time, when people were constricting and firing and everything, we decided to run into Asia, and particularly to run into Malaysia. And we worked a deal with the government, the big pension plans, that they would allow us to manage their money, but we would manage it in Malaysia because they wanted to develop talent in Malaysia. So my job was to go in and start that asset management company in Malaysia. Um, and that's what we did. And we had nothing in assets. Now it's not huge, but by Malaysian standards, we have probably about $15 billion in Malaysia,
Very huge.
managed in Malaysia. And so it's been a development plan to develop Malay people to be investors and to have a good mix of knowledge about investing in Malaysia and developing it, but also a knowledge globally. And then we've used those people, the asset managers we have there in Malaysia, to help us. I think you'll be familiar with this, but for Muslims, they like to invest. They have certain investment restrictions, and so that's called sukuk, or Sharia investing. And so Malaysia is now one of the leaders in sukuk, which is a type of Sharia investing, and we now have one of the largest global sukuk funds that invests not only Malaysia but Indonesia and Middle East and other Muslim countries, and has done very well. So that's the type of thing that when I was at Penn, I couldn't. You can't create that type of thing. You have to. It just happens, and it's very satisfying. I just went back to Malaysia in January because we were given an award, and I told you previously, met the Prime Minister while we were there, and got his thanks, and trying to work with him and the government to try to develop Malaysia. So that's that's really rewarding. It's really satisfying.
No, it is amazing. And again, this is where I offered my thanks too soon and too generally earlier. So now it sounds terrible if I offer it again. But you get the gratitude, like you get the picture in a sense. And I'm sure it's definitely not easy in a sense. Like I know many people right now in Malaysia who struggle with setting up like creating impact, finding the right talent and all of that. So I'm sure that it is even more challenging when you started in a sense. What do you think was and not just exclusively in Malaysia? I don't want to monopolize our conversation, but in every new country, in a sense, each of them has their own culture, their own way of doing things. What has been what has been the thing that has enabled you to succeed in kind of understanding and at the same time growing within that culture in a sense? Because you don't exactly come in and you replace everything. You seem to really nurture the talent, nurture the people, nurture the countries. So how are you able to do that
Yeah.
successfully?
So it's interesting that you say culture, because every country does have a unique culture, and when you're working for a large global organization, that organization has culture. And then, if you will, people within the industry, people who are well educated, have a certain agreement and culture. I mean, there at Penn, you have people from all over the world, and yes, you're all different, but you're probably more similar to each other in many ways than you are to many of the people back in your own country in some ways. I mean, you probably can mingle in Philadelphia or New York in some ways that is hard. Like for me in Montana, when I go back to my rural community, I'm a bit estranged from them because I have very different experiences of the world than they do. That's sad for me, but it's a reality in lots of ways, and including politically, it's hard. So when you're in a situation like trying to start a business in Brazil or Malaysia or Korea or China or India or South Africa, all of places that I've started asset management companies, you have to or try to be understanding of the local culture and how people think. Now, there's a local culture, and then there's a local kind of investment management culture as well, right? So in most countries, when I have developed these, they were very conservative. They just invested in banks. In South Africa, they all wanted to invest in the stock market. Like, just like, why? Why would you put 100% in the stock market? And in Brazil, you put 100% in fixed income. I'll very quickly tell you, in South Africa, you couldn't get your money out of the country. Most of the companies were tied to gold, and the currency was devaluing. So if you invested in equity, you basically, it was a way to be global, even though they were South African companies and your money was restricted. Brazil has, for a very long time, had high inflation, but also incredibly high real interest rates, meaning the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. And it's been so high, at times as high as 12 or 18%, that it just doesn't make sense. The risk reward for investing in fixed income versus equity makes it sense to be in fixed income. So that's a culture, that's a whole different way. And so to go down there and talk about what you do in America, you have to be careful with. And then the other mistake that I made was, being a Wharton guy. In all these countries, there's somebody who went to Wharton or some other school, and you tend to want to hire them. And the problem is that quite frequently, and I guess this is a little bit of a criticism, is that when someone goes away to school, they lose touch with their country, and they know less about their country than, maybe than even I do. And so you have to hire people, and I generally preferred people that were kind of, how do I say this, rugged up from the bottom locally, than people who'd kind of gone off and had some great education. Because the Wharton, I'm sorry, I'm really being critical, but the Wharton or Harvard or whatever people tended to be bluntly pretty arrogant and wanted lots more money, and they were more difficult to work with, and they weren't very well liked by the local people. So that's just kind of part of my story. When you go overseas and you start something, don't hire the globally educated, best English speaking person. Hire somebody who's kind of worked their way up, which I'm proud to say that our head of Malaysia is a woman, Hanifa, who worked her way up, and she's probably one of the highest ranking female financial people, certainly in Malaysia and also in Asia. And so, what a wonderful thing to be able to develop somebody like her, since I think I hired her in 2008 or 2010, something like that. So for a period of time, and watch her, phenomenal success and growth. But I have my own arrogance in that. And, I told you that we started in Brazil this government fund looking at good corporate governance and kind of the American ethics, and kind of talking about some of those type of things. And then, American corporations blew up. Enron blew up. Lots of companies have blown up. And so the credibility of America as the center of ethics was definitely rocked. And so, you just have to check that. You have to be careful about that.
No, very, 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 I would say, eye-opening, and I love this perspective just because it's so real in a sense. I'm going to be honest. I often have a tough time connecting to people in the finance world. I know, I'm a College of Arts and Science student, so half my classmates confuse me to no end when I speak to them about finance in a way. But one thing that I really like that you mentioned is sometimes as you go out there, as you experience more things, as you learn more things about there, you can get a little bit disconnected from the people you want to serve if you're not careful in a way. I'm arrogant enough to think I'm smart enough to get disconnected at this moment in time, but I'm not there yet. But it is something that at times I do worry about, and it is something that I worry. That the seed of that may be planted right now, because there is a community that I really really want to serve. I really really want to go give back to in a way. But I don't know that but at times you don't even realize how far removed you get from them, even though you're constantly engaging with them. You are someone who's made such a huge global impact from to a much wider community than you would have expected. Hopefully, I think when you first started out, how do you make sure that you're constantly, connected to the people at the grassroots level, people the everyday people who you actually want to serve?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I first started being global in the 80s. So, when voicemail came out and you could call overnight and leave a voicemail, and then they'd call you and leave a voicemail, was a communication. So, at some level, technology has enabled us to have connections that were difficult to have before. But at another level, it's sort of made us have, um, I don't know, a little bit less sincere or something. I mean, I think we're going through a period where people are really striving for authenticity, like people who just come across straight and real. Um, and at the same time, all of the social media and everything is really quite promoted and ironically promoted to look authentic or promoted to look casual. I read about some of these um, social media things that people watch and they think they're just some mother talking to their son or something with a dog or something, but they're actually quite scripted. And so, it's, I think we're just living in a world where it's really hard to understand and be empathetic with people who are very different. And something that's hard is that sometimes, and it must be true for you and your nonprofit, sometimes those people that you're trying to help are not, not always the most easy and nicest people, right? And maybe because they've had struggles in their lives at some point. So for me, to answer your question, the way that I try to resolve that at one level was to travel a lot. I'm travel as much as probably anybody at least up until the pandemic. But that has a downside too. That's really hard on you physically. It's hard on your family. Fortunately, I have a company that pays for it, but it's really expensive. Um, and and you can get yourself insulated by traveling first class all the time, staying in the nicest hotels, going to the nicest restaurants. So, when you go to Korea or Shanghai or something, at some level you want to go to the nicest place in town. But I always try to say I want to go to the place you go with your family, right? I want to meet your family. And so at least for me, with the people I work with, I've always tried to be um, I don't know, personal and kind of bring it down and meet their families, meet their kids, try to figure out what their kids are interested in. Even that said, I'm still dealing with educated people who are, represent don't represent the country as a whole, but at least I get a little closer to the culture and kind of understand how they think and what their issues are. And in terms of trying to understand people investing, I just ask people, and you know, I try to not be rude, but I just ask people, how are you thinking about your retirement or your investment? Or I'm not trying to ask them how much money they make or anything. I'm really just trying to figure out what are you struggling with? How do you try to make yourself stable and meet your financial goals? Um, and I've had pretty good success with that. So I have a huge audience. I have whatever 365,000 people who listened to my stuff last year. But so you can't, you can touch a lot of people, but you can't really know what's going on. So when I can, I try to, um, I just try to talk to people and kind of get a sense. That's why I travel back to Montana every year. Um, and try to understand that it's a very different world. The average person there makes maybe $40,000 a year or something. It's a very different world.
Very beautifully said, and I think it captures, the feeling of authenticity, as you said, and I completely agree. I think in a very strange way, we have become both more connected and more disconnected at the same time. I feel
Yeah.
like as you said, especially recently in the last few years, I feel like the world's just being stretched into both extremes that you never really know which way it's going to go at times. So good,
Yeah,
good.
I mean, one of the things I'd say to your student listeners, and I hope maybe you already know this, maybe it's obvious, I don't know, but those friendships that you make in college, in many cases, for me, certainly, and probably for other people, are friendships you can have the rest of your life. I mean, you're sitting there talking to somebody, and if you're like me, and if you're a liberal arts student, you're probably like you're philosophizing about something, and 40 years later, you're still, and for whatever reason, when you get out of school, it's hard to make those same kind of friendships. And you asked me how my week was. I literally just spent time with somebody I went to college with over the weekend. They live up in Seattle. They come down and visit. I go up to Seattle and visit them. So I guess I would say this isn't really unprofessional, but I would just say really treasure those friendships that you can develop in college.
Okay. Good advice. I will spend more time with my friends. I'll not reject the next
Yeah,
social. Promise.
not on. What I'm talking about is literally spending time with them. Rather than in playing games with them or something else, like in person, old fashioned.
Oh, good. All right. Booking my like canceling everything on the work calendar for like after spring break. I'm joking. I'm joking. Um, you know, as we wind down this interview, there's so many things that I think that we can talk about, and then that there's so many questions that I have in a way. But the one question that really makes me like curious to hear your thoughts on is, you have literally made so much change in all around the world in a sense. And I think many of us, right now in college, we all want to change the world. We have no idea where to start. Everything looks terrifying. And as you
Yeah.
said, we're in the soul searching. We're worrying about, the planet. We're worrying about each other in a sense. And making real change can seem something that is so far off in a sense, more of a pipe dream at times. How do you like if you could kind of go back in time and talk to college you in a sense, what do you think was the thing that you did that made you able to achieve all of this? So what was it about you that helped you kind of create all this change?
Well, this isn't very helpful, but I think I was just very lucky and lived at a very fortunate time when all these emerging markets were, the same opportunities I had aren't available now because, those economies have developed and things are different. Um, I think that sometimes you can get a little bit too theoretical and try to save the world, where maybe what you need to do is save your neighbor, or I started out advising one person at a time and trying to really understand what that one person needed. And now I talk to, hundreds of thousands of people, um, but I'm still trying to focus on what one person needs. I'm talking to one person. I hope the person on the other side feels I'm talking to them. And so that time I spent one on one has been useful forever. And I think that's, sometimes what you can do when you're out of school. And I think the truth is you have no idea what you're going to do. So set some, like for me, I just had two guideposts. I wanted to really invest with sort of something that helps middle class people, and I wanted to do something international. And it wasn't clear how those two things were going to fit, but those are my two guideposts that I was trying to look and try to figure out how to do. And I think that's really helpful, to just kind of try to figure out how you're going to fit a couple things together. And it's like for me, I still to this day, people say I'm on Wall Street or whatever, and I guess technically I am, and I speak on CNBC and that type of thing quite a bit, but it's not how I think of myself, right? I think of myself as out with the people, if you will. So this sort of depends what you want, what your goals are, but at least, at least for me, and now I'm closer to the end of my career than the beginning of my career. It's been pretty important to me that I had a mission and that I tried to accomplish something, right? So, you guys, if you want to go out, and you're all smart and you can go out and make a lot of money and that type of thing, and a lot of you will and do. But you also, you have an opportunity to really have an impact, and so if you kind of keep that in your mind, I think you will. I'm just the Penn students that I've met are phenomenal. They're just they're great. They're really well educated. I'm now, as an aside, trying to help kids in schools that aren't Penn, that aren't super great schools, just sort of your average kids that got into college somehow and are trying to figure out what they want to do. Imagine them if Penn students don't know what to do. Imagine these kids, whose parents might not speak English or have no direction. They need a lot of help.
No, I agree in a sense, and
well, I guess that's part of your charity, so that's great.
No, that's my crowd in a sense, like my, but definitely agree with I love that the ending. I think you've wrapped up like the whole session in a very neat and impactful way. So to kind of end off, I just say thank you, and thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me. I am available if students want to link in with me on LinkedIn. I'm available. I write a regular newsletter that may or may not be of interest to people, but if it is, you're welcome to read it and join. And I think Penn's a great school, so congratulations to all of you that are there, and you have the opportunity to make a difference in the world, even if it's just with a few people.
Okay, so start with once and then change the world. Got step 2. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening as well. This has been Changing Reality. As always, we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.